Joe.
Yeah, tell the story about your folks.
About my what?
Your folks
My folks.
getting the phone call.
Oh.
That's the
Yeah, thank you, Larry. The Army didn't stop the paperwork. And it wasn't a phone call. Two officers showed up at my mom and dad's house. They had stopped at the post office in Pinckney, and my uncle happened to be there. And he went over with them, and the Army told him I had died in Vietnam. And my mom was the mayor of the town, so it went really fast and strong and everything. And next day, I would love to find out more and do things. And the guys that were in Vietnam, Mars Station. All right? Hell, I never heard of what it was until I was there. And they carried me, I guess I was unconscious for about 10 days. And they carried me out on a stretcher and said, "You're going to call your mom." And I said, "I am." And what they had there, a two-way radio. Shortwave radio, and they got a hold of a guy in Iowa. And I had to give him my parents' phone number, and he called it, and every time we would talk, and I mean, I just remember my mom just screaming, and I had really had to calm her down. And so when I would say, I had to say over, then she would have to move the microphone where she could talk, and when she said over, she had to move it up to the ear so she could hear what we were talking about. So, but I think that would make a great story, and all the stories that these folks could tell about what went on when they were making these calls, and and just what a great duty that was, to volunteer your services, sitting at home all hours of the night or anything, and waiting for somebody to call on the short wave to make a call to a family. And now that we just sit and type on a cell phone, all across the world. So go ahead,
John. Tell us what you want to talk about with Jane Fonda.
About what?
Tell us what you want to talk with Jane Fonda about when you have lunch with Jane Fonda.
I got her credit app. Does anybody want to buy it? I was going to put it on eBay. Social Security number, everything. I'm going to give it back to her. So, yes, sir.
If you don't mind, sir, I'd like to introduce Whoopi Alvear, Chairman of the Speaking Committee.
Yeah.
I'd like to introduce a gentleman here in the audience that all of us owe great gratitude for, because he continues serving us. Lieutenant Colonel Roger Knopf, would you stand up, please? Roger has taken on the responsibility for all the funeral services for veterans. Every time one of our Muskegon County residents dies, the funeral directors are alerted to Roger's personal home phone number, and he makes arrangements so that all the funeral services for the veterans are well done. And I mean well done. I've seen him countless times. And he's continued his service not only to his country, but now to Muskegon residents. And Roger was an Air Force pilot in Vietnam, Lieutenant Colonel.
Five months with the first cab as a reporter, back to 65.
You want to talk about anything from Vietnam?
Dr. Cobbler here, my friend, has a lot more to say because of he was one of the doctors.
I didn't come here to speak tonight. You don't have a mic. No, Vietnam was individual stories by individual soldiers.
There's got to be thousands and
there's
thousands
every
of them.
soldier has their own story.
They do.
I particularly like to wear my 44th Med Brigade hat because I don't want anybody
to assume that I was a jungle badass because we were there to patch up and to try to save as many as we could
Yeah.
in the hospitals. So the 12th Evac Hospital, when I was there in 67, 68, and you're right on target, they came in by the boatloads.
Yeah.
And we had over 10,000 casualties that we worked with during the time I was there.
Did you ever
And-
know Lovey? He was
Well-
our doctor, Andrew Lovey.
It depends on
Yeah.
what hospital you went through. We were
He
12th,
was in the field.
yeah, we were at 12th Evac
Yeah,
Hospital.
right, so-
We supported the 25th Division and some of the 101st when
Yeah.
they came through, but primarily the 25th Division. But yeah, every soldier has their own
Yeah.
stories. But so thank you for your service and
Oh, thank you for everything you did. That's your.
having put people in body bags. Thank God one of them got out of it. So thank you.
Wes, where we at?
Yes, I'd like to say something real quick. Also, John, when my unit returned home from the Middle East, we were giving parades. And when we sat on the airplane, the captain came on and said, this is your captain speaking. We'd like to make an announcement. We have some service members returning from Iraq, and we were acknowledged by everybody on the aircraft. And the Korean War veterans and the Vietnam era veterans didn't get that recognition. They didn't get that parade. And in fact, a lot of times, you said you were spit on
Yeah.
at one point. And that's common. That's a common theme. And so I think now we're finally ready to acknowledge the heroics that these young men answered the call and sacrificed selflessly. So on behalf of everybody at the USS Silversides, thank you, John.
That's you're the ones for here. Adopt a grave.
I have a story that I think, to me, it makes it. I feel my service was my 2 years I spent in Vietnam, 66 and 70. I went back. I was infantry in 66, and I'd branch transferred to AG in 70. So they sent me back for another tour. But a few years ago, down at our fair, Berrien Springs, another Vietnam vet and I were standing around. There was an individual who had built a fire base, a miniature fire base, and we were talking about things that went on at fire bases and stuff. And we had this Oriental individual come up to us, this man, and he had his son, and he said, "Son, I'd like for you to shake the hands of two men who saved our country." And so we shook the kid's hands, and then he said, and I live in Benton Harbor, and there are a lot of Whirlpool executives, and he was a Whirlpool person. But he said, in 1960, he said, I grew up in Singapore, and he said in 1960, our country had no military. None of those countries had any military. And he said, you guys gave us 16 years to get our military in order. And they talk about the domino theory, and I sort of believe that. I believe that what we did there enabled the other countries to get their act together, and who knows what would have been if it hadn't have happened, what would it be like today. So I think that's one thing that makes me feel good about our service.
Agreed. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anybody else? How about any you folks have a child that went to Vietnam or anything, or know of somebody? Any stories how it was like when they came back? Okay. I know it was very hard on a lot of guys. I know. Go ahead.
I was in the first cab. Before I went to Vietnam, I worked for the city of Detroit, and I worked in the forestry department with a lot of World War II vets, guys that were in the CCC camps in the 30s, and then I know when I got back, they treated me like royalty. And I think, all the horror stories that you hear, I never had any experience like that from the guys that I worked with. when I came back through the airport, well, when I came back into country, when it was mustering out, they wanted me to pay for the ribbons and stuff, so I didn't put any ribbons on my uniform or anything. I got on a plane, came back to Detroit. Some lady offered me a ride. She drove me home to my front door from Metro. And I just walked in and, surprised my family just walking in the door. But I think the response that I got from the guys that I worked with, I think, was healing.
Mm-hmm.
I really appreciated it.
Yeah.
I worked at the VA hospital in Allen Park from 66 to 71 and worked with a lot of young men that came back from Vietnam.
Yeah.
And quadriplegics. It
Yeah.
was just absolutely devastating what these young men had gone through and what their life was like now.
Yeah. I have a dear friend, Michael Naranjo. You may want to look him up on Google. Michael lost his eyes in Vietnam and the use of his right hand. And he is a world-famous sculptor today. I would read his mail to him because he couldn't read. He lived at the Taos Pueblo in New Mexico, and his father was the Indian religious man. And they never came up to visit him. They probably didn't have the ways or means. And about 3 times took him down there to be with his parents and stuff. And Michael got out of the hospital before I did. And a few months after, I get a call from his father. And he wants me to talk some sense into his son. And I go, well, what's the problem? And he says he wants to be a sculptor. And I said, what's wrong with that? I said, I can't roll a ball of clay. And he gave me a wolf being at the moon that was just magnificent. And he's, you don't understand. And so we're going over this back and forth, I said, you should have a chance to do what he wants. Only he can fail. I don't want him, he's my son. I don't want to see him fail or this and that. And finally, but you don't understand. Well, finally, I said, what don't I really understand? Now, you got to understand, I'm 22 years old. And he says, he hired a model and he's going and feeling her up and then going back to the clay. I'm going to tell him something that he shouldn't do? Michael's a world-famous sculptor today. He has a Southwest Indian Museum. All his sculpturing doesn't have eyes. And he designs homes, Pueblo-styled homes, 1 and 2 stories, and he can't do steps. They have trails going all around the house to go up to the next level and stuff. But he just, lives in about a $2 billion home and laughing and giggling at the world. But, 4 beautiful daughters that he's never seen. I think that's the saddest part, I hope to see him in November. And that's just part of other stories, we'd get... Randy Nelson lost a leg in Vietnam. He was another one in my unit there in the hospital. And I just remember we'd sneak out with him and another. There was like 6 of us, and we'd get in this station wagon. And one of the guys had a station wagon. Well, one of the guys was in a body cast, full body cast. Yeah, and so we'd strap him to a 2-wheeler. Those little carts, and we'd pull him all around, and get him out. And he'd lay flat in the back of the station wagon on this 2-wheeler, and we go to the bar, and he met this girl one night, and he was so excited. So he says, no, she wants me to come over. So we take him, and there's 3 of us trying to pull him up 4 flights of stairs to her apartment. And he said, now, don't you come back for 2 hours. Don't come back for 2 hours. So we leave him there. 2 hours later, we come back, and he's still standing outside the door in this car, and she wouldn't let him in. That was before cell phones. But those are the things I think you remember the most. And, in every situation, there's always, I feel, joy and things to make you laugh, no matter how bad it is. And I think that's what we have to look at in this world today is, one of my new T-shirts in hell is if Hillary's elected, we're going to hell. If Trump's elected, we're going to hell. So we all might as well meet in hell now, hell, Michigan. So, but you just try to find the humor in so much stuff, and I hope we can all live that way. Wes?
Thank you, John. Anybody
All
else
right.
have any questions?
All right.
All right.
Go adopt a grade.
Thank you, John.
All right.
John, on behalf of the Silverside staff, we want to present you with this USS Silverside sweatshirt for the inevitable winter that is almost upon us. Soon. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Thank you. All right, and thank you guys for coming. Definitely tune in next Monday when we have our guest from Firebase Ripcord, Bill Whipple. So, Frank, do you have any other housekeeping? Mom K, yes. Great event on the horizon, October 8th, Saturday, October 8th. All right, thank you, folks.